Nola Straight, when she was a young child, she had a babysitter named Mia Parsons. And she loved this babysitter. I was very inspired by my own babysitter growing up, and just that feeling of being a young girl and being so inspired by like a teenage girl or young woman, because you just want to be older and you want to be, have a boyfriend and all the things. So I really played into that and their relationship. And while Nola is just none the wiser going to sleep, Mia's downstairs. She hears a noise and goes downstairs and finds her babysitter dead and this terrifying masked serial killer at the bottom of her stairs. And, that deeply affects her throughout her life. But of course, the book takes place in modern day when she believes that this horrific serial killer, the hiding man, is back 20 years later and that he's coming for her. I thought about that choice before I decided that it came from her father, Chick, and having make more sense to be a radio show because of the time that he started it. But I had the idea for the book in my head very generally. Like I knew I wanted it to take place in Portland, Oregon, because I love the Pacific Northwest and the very rich setting. And I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, which is called Monsters Among Us. And it's because I don't listen to true crime podcasts anymore. I like get enough of that, So I love listening to paranormal shows. And I was listening to his show, and it's not a call-in, but it's like people will call in and they'll leave a voicemail and then he'll play it and he'll kind of have his opinion about it. And I was making breakfast, actively thinking about what I wanted to happen in my book. And I was like, I wish I could have a show like this. It's so, because true crime is so heavy and it's real. And there's so many emotions at play and so many other people's emotions at play. And I was like, I wish I could have a show like this where people call in and I could take the calls live. Like that concept sounds so fun. And then I was like, oh, maybe I can just make that my protagonist's job. And then I immediately thought of, that scene in earlier on in the book that really feels like the inciting incident of the book, where she gets a call that makes her realize that the hiding man is potentially back. And so that all just came tumbling. And then I wrote the outline in the next 4 days. But then it kind of came to me naturally, like, oh, then it can be connected to her dad. I wanted to have this complex relationship with him. And I thought that would also give way to her having that interest her whole life because, well, that's what her dad did. And so it kind of felt natural to do a radio show because, like we're talking about, that felt more true to the time before a podcast became really popular and just a little different from what I do with my job, because I think having a radio show sounds really fun and different. Nola's father, Chick Straight, started the radio show Night Watch when she was very young, due to his own interest in paranormal stories and them having recently moved when she was a child to the Pacific Northwest from California. I feel like when I lived in Oregon, like everybody, this is so real. Like everybody is like, Bigfoot is a big thing in Oregon. My dad lives in Oregon. He's like obsessed with Bigfoot. And it feels like that kind of forest setting is also, you think a lot about aliens and cryptids and just, it just felt like it made sense for him to have this show after moving to Oregon. And he is this very charismatic, kind of egomaniacal host that people kind of love to hate. But he's good at his job and he has a lot of charisma. And when he's ready to retire and just work on writing books about paranormal stories and just stop being tied to the studio, he passes the show on to his daughter, Nola Straight, when she was in her 20s. And then she very happily takes it over and steps into his shoes. It's kind of funny because in a lot of early reviews, people will say that she has a true crime podcast, which I understand why people say that and why people think that, but she doesn't focus on crimes at all. And I did that for a reason, because I wanted Nola to not be super familiar with murder cases as she is kind of investigating this serial killer on her own and the murder of her babysitter. So I didn't want her to be very well versed in that topic. And so I made it exclusively paranormal, kind of like Coast to Coast, like I mentioned, that my dad loved listening to when I was growing up. Just strictly focused on paranormal stories like people calling in about cryptids or Bigfoot or aliens or doppelgangers or any of that kind of unexplained stuff that isn't tied to tragedy, or like ghosts, which we see in some calls as well, or creepy creatures. So yeah, strictly paranormal. Like when I thought of that original call, that inciting incident call with the character Felicity, I just knew that I wanted to make that a very pivotal moment in the story about a ghost and about just that unexplained character that is or is not a real killer. But no, I should have had a ghost call in. The first call that we get in the book, where she's talking about the woman Maggie is talking about the creature woman clad in white who's scratching at the dirt. I read this Reddit story years ago that I've just kept in my mind, of something very similar, of this man who's by a lake and he's in a boat and actually took pictures of this woman in white, and she's wearing like a little white bonnet. And it's such a picture because there's actually a photo of it. And so when I was trying to think of something scary that would be a good introduction to the show, I thought of that and I was like, oh, I kind of want to base this story off of that because that was real. And that post really scared me. So I thought it would be fun to include something like that because we don't dive into the show that much throughout the book. So I wanted to give like just enough of a taste of the kind of calls that Nola gets by giving something really creepy with that one. We love being afraid in a fictional sense. I think that's why we love going to the movies and watching horror movies, because it's not happening to us, which is why I also think that there is a lot of sensationalism in true crime, because it's something crazy and horrible that didn't happen to you. So it gives you this ability to be scared by it, but not so scared because you're directly affected by it. And I think, I don't know, I'm interested in the psychological aspect and element of that phenomenon of enjoying being scared unless it's actually happening to you. But with the show, my podcast Going West, I like to be very respectful of victims and I don't like to sensationalize killers. But because this was a fictional story, I really wanted to show that other side of things, of trying to be respectful and show people the real side, and this detective who feels like a failure, and these people who are connected to victims who want answers so many years later. I wanted to show that, but of course, because it is fiction, I wanted it to be really scary. And I wanted to create these really terrifying scenes with this horrific character, which is why I gave him a mask as well, because a lot of serial killers don't have masks. That's more of like a thing we see in movies like Halloween or Scream, Friday the 13th, etc. So I really wanted to kind of amp up that side of it and remind people this is not a true story, but it could be, because something like this could happen. So I think that was really the scariest thing about the book, is that it's also very real, even though it's fake, that something like this has happened to so many people out there. And so I really played into that as much as I could, of like, what would really scare me if this was happening, because this could happen. Some man could be outside my kitchen window tapping and knocking, and why would that scare me so much? And so it was really fun to play into that.